Hello, my friends. I'm so glad that you're joining us today. Today is an incredibly special episode. Well, every episode feels special. And today is special because I get to interview one of my mentors. By the way, hi, I'm Katie. I am a certified child life specialist, and I have been for the past 14 years. And I started this podcast over 7 years ago so that families had a place to come and share their journeys so that other families could feel less alone. We know that being in the hospital is isolating. Having a child that has a disability or a rare disease or goes through trauma can feel like nobody else in the whole world knows what I'm going through. But when they come to this podcast, they get to hear other parents share the words that they feel inside of their own bodies. Today is such a special day. I get to interview a woman who so many child life specialists have either heard about or worked with or learned from or been supported by, and her name is Deb Vilas. She also goes by Deb, and as you hear in this episode, her sweet parents call her Debbie. So now it's like after talking with her parents and Deb, I want to call her Debbie. To me, Deb is someone who, without judgment, wants to listen and learn. And I think that's probably the key to her successful connections, interactions, and just professional peers that she has in the field of child life. She wants to ask questions. She wants to learn. She wants to hear about your experience. She has so much wisdom. She could lead any conversation. She could talk my ear off for hours, but she doesn't. She asks questions. She seeks to learn. She is concerned and curious about how we make the child life field better. And so that's just the way I feel about Deb. She is someone who has been open to my crazy ideas, and I'm just so glad to be in her orbit. Formally, I will provide you a little info about Deb Vilas. She is an educator, child life specialist, social worker, writer, public speaker, and consultant whose passion is anything that supports children's development and healing in the face of everyday life and trauma. She is also the program director of child life at Bank Street College. She is also the facilitator for clinical supervision in the Child Life Circle, and she is also a very dear friend of mine. Something I learned about Deb that I did not know before, that she grew up in hospitals. And so I'm glad that she will say it correctly on the podcast. But she came to me and she said, "Hey, I have an idea for a podcast. And I don't know if you've done anything like this before, but I'd really like to talk with my folks." It is my true honor to share this beautiful interview and conversation I got to have with Deb, her dad Skip, and her mom Joyce. They are in their 90s, and they take us back over 50 years ago, remembering what it was like to have a perfect baby girl who was born with an unknown skin condition, and the misconceptions that they have learned over the past 50 years about what Deb actually had and what she has, the lack of support and knowledge they had back then, the separation that they had to deal with. This is a profound conversation and a peek into what medicine was like 50 years ago for parents. So thank you so much to Deb and Joyce and Skip for trusting me and this platform to share your story. I love this as a legacy podcast for Deb, her family, for people who have ichthyosis right now, for families who are navigating the journey to know even 50 years ago when things were so different, so many of the emotions and the feelings were just the same. It's my honor to share this beautiful conversation with you. Thank you so much, Deb, for letting me do this. Hello, my friends. Welcome to Child Life on Call. This podcast is a safe place for parents to share their stories about what it's like to have a child that has a medical experience, diagnosis, disease, and or everything in between. We know there's power in sharing stories, and that power multiplies when you can listen to other parents who have walked a similar path to yours. Giving and getting advice is great, but hearing how another parent navigates the complexities and nuances of healthcare is even better. As a child life specialist, my role is to support, validate, and provide emotionally safe spaces for kids and their families, and I am so honored to be on this journey with you. In addition to parent stories, we sprinkle in some expert episodes every now and again that have content for both parents and professionals in the field of healthcare, all with the mission to empower parents to be confident advocates and partners with the care team during healthcare experiences. We're so glad you're here. I was wondering, Skip, would you mind just kind of introducing yourself and telling us a little bit about who you are and where you live and just about you?
My real name is Franklin Vilas. They call me Skip. I'm an Episcopal clergyman, retired, and my wife and I live in Heath Village, which is a retirement home in Hackettstown, New Jersey. Our ministry, which Deb was with us on, took us from Connecticut to Massachusetts to New York City, where she left to go to college. I'm in my 90th year. My daughter says you're 89, but I'm in my 90th year. And the time we're talking about is over a half century ago. So we'll do our best to remember. But we are getting old.
It's such a privilege for me just to meet you, as I'm such a fan, and just so honored to know your daughter, Debbie, and to get to meet her parents, who produced such a wonderful woman and has made such an impact in our field, is just a complete privilege and honor for me. And I think I'm so interested to hear what you remember, as you say, from over half century ago, and how it's impacted you as Deb's parents. And I guess take us back, Skip, to kind of the very beginning and finding out that something was going on when Deb was born.
Yes, well, of course, my wife was very busy at the time, but the physician, when I took her to the hospital, said to me, for whatever reason, I don't know, he said, this may be difficult birth and you should stay around. In those days, the husband was sent home, basically. Yeah. Woke up in the morning and you had a kid. But they asked me to stay around. And so this was in Norwalk Hospital in Norwalk, Connecticut. I remember that I took a wheelchair and did wheelies up and down the street in front of the hospital until I've forgotten when it was. It was 2 or 3 in the morning when the doctor came to me and said, I don't know what's going on. She said, this child is born. I don't know what's wrong with her. She was red all over and cracking. Her skin was cracking and all the fissures. And he said, I'm not sure that she will make it through the night. So it was a tough beginning. And they put her in an incubator in Norwalk Hospital. And basically she was in that incubator for a month and we were not able to touch her or hold her, but we could look through the glass and see her. And Joyce, you may want to add to that, but I just remember it was a tough time because we weren't sure what was going to happen.
Well, you covered it very well because we weren't able to do very much. But the thing that worked so well, you had faith, and maybe because of your religion and your background, you kept me together, which kept us all together, which was really special.
I remember taking communion to you in the hospital during that time. Mm-hmm. But there's not much to say about that month. They could not diagnose anything. And after a month, they said, we don't know what's wrong. We think you should take her to Presbyterian Children's Hospital, Presbyterian in New York. And so for the first time, we were able to hold Debbie. And we rode from Norwalk, Connecticut to New York City, took her to the hospital, where she stayed for another month. And but we were able to visit her, of course, and begin to get to know her up close.
Not
She was,
really enough to really touch and hold
as much.
as much,
Yeah.
than
I
you.
think that the big difference here, Katie, is the whole issue of parental presence. Parents were not allowed to spend the night. They could be there to visit during visiting hours during the day.
They didn't want us.
No, they didn't want parents there. So
And it-
a lot has changed since
and of
that.
course, they hadn't invented child life yet, I don't think. At least we never ran into it.
Hmm.
But the problem was, of course, that they could not diagnose what was wrong. They prescribed ectopic,
Ointment and
Ointment.
creams,
yeah,
steroids, cortisone.
right, good cortisone. Base was cortisone. She was, of course, beginning to look better and feel better, but she was still exfoliating all the time. And the doctors said to Joyce, basically, do you want to take her home and be her nurse? And Joyce said yes. And so we took her home and began to treat her with the cortisone and to treat her as a normal child.
I'd love to pause there for a quick second and, just talk about the beginning when you weren't able to be there. And while things have changed and parents may be more welcome in the hospital now, there's still, socioeconomic reasons or perhaps geographic reasons that families can't stay connected during that hospitalization, especially when it's a baby or an infant in the hospital. Do you remember the feelings you had when you would walk into the hospital to visit Deb? As you say, you couldn't spend the night there, but what did it feel like when you walked in?
I enjoyed every moment I was allowed to be with her. In fact, we snitched in a little extra time because they thought I was doing well, and Debbie needed that because she was different from every other natural child with nothing bothering her. You know what I mean?
I know exactly what you mean.
We didn't know where Debbie hurt the most or how much she hurt. And so we had to learn touch and sound and gentleness.
Hmm. Did that feel natural to you as her mother, that you could kind of read her?
Yeah. She and Skip was the father. We were very, very close and able to cope with this because this little thing, she might have had some problems with her, but I don't know how she had a smile, or maybe we were thinking that smile, but every smile and holding, I think somehow she knew we were going to be the ones that held her from then on most of the time. And that's security.
Hmm.
I had, I guess some. It was a difficult time because we also had an older daughter. Debbie had an older sister we needed to take care of. And I was concerned about Joyce and about her feelings. So my concern was for the total family unit. I thought Debbie was quite cute, and I loved her. But I was, of course, at that time also full-time active ministry, and it was a difficult time. Well, what happened was that there was a very good pediatrician, and but his wife said to him, "You need to have her see Dr. Sheard in Stanford." Dr. Sheard was a well-known dermatologist, and the wife knew of him, and she felt still had no diagnosis. She felt that he might be able to help. So we took Debbie to him, And he looked at her and he said, I think I may have seen something like this in Greenwich, Connecticut 10 years ago. And he diagnosed congenital ichthyosiform erythroderma. And with the diagnosis, we then had a better sense of what was happening, but we continued to treat her with the cortisone, which led to other problems I can tell you about. I want to say, though, you mentioned the fact of our faith. I think our religion was very important to us. Not only did we have a very supportive congregation who cared for us and helped us in the usual ways, but we believe very strongly in the power of prayer, not as magic, and not as trying to convince God to do what we want God to do, but as a source of spiritual power. And we, from the very beginning, in the Episcopal tradition, laid hands on Debbie and prayed for her healing at a deep level, not only her body and mind, but also her spirit. I think that was an important element. Not everything, of course, but it was important.
And absolutely. And important for you too. It seems that comfort in having, I hear that a lot from parents, whether it's the family support or community support or a spiritual or religious support, that outer layer that feels like almost a comfort, a source of strength to carry you through that time is very important.
There was an important process that led to Joyce, me as well, but Joyce in particular, becoming Debbie's health advocate. We continued to put the cortisone on Debbie, and when Deb was about, what would you say, honey, or Deb, about 18 months, 16 months?
I think at about 16 to 18 months, Mom noticed a problem.
Her mother noticed that she did not appear to be growing. She was running around, talking, speaking, but she was very small. And she went to the doctors and basically yelled at them and said, "You have got to do some tests." They said, "Oh, she's normal. She's just a little, she's just small. She'll grow." But Joyce went after them and they did the tests, and it turned out that cortisone, they didn't realize this, but the skin is so porous. The cortisone had entered her body and basically shut off her endocrine system. And she had stopped growing. So the physicians then withdrew her. They took her off the cortisone, and she went into the equivalent of drug withdrawal. She was wandering around, running into furniture at that point. And so finally, they sent her to Children's Hospital in Boston, where Joyce went. But of course, once again, she couldn't spend the night. There was no child life. And in order to catch all of the liquid so they could test her, they had Deb spread eagled over a hole in a bed, tied down, hands and feet. And Joyce, I had to stay in New Canaan because of my work. Joyce accompanied her. She could not stay in the hospital at night, but she was there for that full time until they finally discovered that what they needed to do was to withdraw her from the cortisone gradually, and they were able to get her back online, and she started to grow again. But Joyce became a very vocal advocate at that point.
And I want to say that Mom doesn't always remember all the details now, but throughout my life, she has told me stories of what it was like to walk into the hospital room and find me tied down. And she always weeps when she tells that story, that it was very hard for her to see me suffering in that way.
Yeah, because they didn't pick her up when they should have.
Yep. So that was hard to witness for my mom.
Let me come all the time, and thank heavens they did, because the more they let me come, the more I hollered and the more I got out of them to do what Debbie needed. She was the first for any of those doctors to see of somebody that had what she had.
Yeah, the
I-
diagnosis, just to let you know, sorry, Pop, is 1 in every 300,000 births. So it's an extremely rare disorder.
Well, now my memory is getting loused up too, but I seem to recall that you were the 23rd case that they had seen in Children's Hospital in their history. I may be wrong about that, but I remember that number.
Yeah, that's a number that would
Yeah.
stick with you. And, you know, time, right, can make things a little bit fuzzy, but there's some moments. And I've talked with so many parents and what they can recall about weight, about vital signs, about just these numbers that stick inside your brain. It sounds like that 23rd number.
Just to cover many years very briefly, Debbie seemed to have a lot more issues than her own. She managed to get very strange problems. She once in her elementary school blew into a jar that had a dead fuzzy caterpillar in it and got quills in her eyes that had to be removed by a physician in Boston. And I think the name of this particular thing was ophthalmia nodosa. She couldn't just do normal things, although she did break a few bones. But but she was in and out of the hospital maybe 3 or 4 times, and I think all the time, both of us were functioning as advocates and supporters. We treated Debbie normally, but there were some not so normal issues that rose as she grew and developed. And I remember standing in the emergency room in the Methodist Hospital in Boston when she was about 15.
Dad, that was in New York.
I'm sorry?
That was in Brooklyn.
Look, what did I say?
You said Boston, but we were in
I
New York.
no, this is Brooklyn. And she had what we felt was a reaction to a sulfur drug, but it was extremely painful, and they were going to they just insisted they were going to take out her appendix. And I remember standing in that emergency room with a few criminals handcuffed to chairs. It's one of those emergency rooms in the city, and just yelling at the top of my lungs, "You get the head president here, or I'm going to sue this hospital." I mean, we found that we had to love and support our daughter in spite of the medical profession sometimes.
They can be such I mean, miracles happen in hospitals, right? And the teams that we get to watch do these miracles are just incredible. But there are times where we know the parents know best, and their gut instincts have to help guide and work in collaboration with the knowledge and the miracles that the care team can perform. You know, now I'm going to call you Debbie from now on, Deb. Debbie's diagnosis, unlike another invisible illness, as it's called, which is seen on the, something you have, but you can't see. Her skin you can see on the outside. As her parents, what was it like in advocating for her or supporting her in social situations with her friends because of her outward appearance?
Brought her forward every day when somebody wanted to say hello. The doctors had nothing to worry about. They didn't touch, but they came to see and talk. And they were just glad to know every day she was a little bit better. And I mean a little bit. It's the growth process was keep your eye on it and just love her.
She did have problems in elementary school because children made fun of her. She was kind of a butt of bullying, and they wouldn't touch her because her hands were dry and wrinkled. We tried to love and support her and help her through that, but we did have to speak relatively sharply to some of her teachers, who just did not comprehend what was going on. But she was a tough survivor, and she I'm sure she was sad at times, but she was able to get through those issues pretty well. By the time we went to New York City and she went to school in Brooklyn Heights, she was just fine. She had many friends there, but growing up was a little difficult because of her of the skin situation.
And I also recall my mom telling me some stories about adult misunderstanding, judgment of my mom. You know, how people can be speaking to you unsolicited conversation in grocery stores or what have you. And my mom has told me about times when somebody would say, well, if you just put sunscreen on her, she wouldn't be burned. Or if you just brushed her teeth, they wouldn't be brown.
Yeah.
Because my teeth had been affected by all the
And
medications I
if you
had.
didn't think that made me furious,
So mom had to deal with a lot of judgment.
I fight for my kids.
Yeah, you did, Mom.
I did. And look at you. You
I
Well,
know.
well,
I know.
you must have felt it in your bones when I fought for you and your dad fought for you. We weren't letting those people push us around because, believe it or not, living with us 24 hours a day, we knew more than some of the doctors.
Right?
it's true.
I don't want to sound negative about the medical profession. I have to say, for instance, Dr. Scheer, the dermatologist who diagnosed the situation, saw her once a week for a year without charging us a cent. I'm sure he was interested in her situation, but he was just a wonderful person, and we did have a lot of support. But I do think it's important. The advocacy role is important, and of course, that's one of the roles that Child Life takes it on behalf of children.
What were some of the maybe more surprising or unexpected moments that maybe you wouldn't have known right at the beginning, but that you came to learn from your experience as her parents?
I think you learned immediately. The first time you picked your child up, you knew that you're not picking up this child the way you would have picked up any other baby. You automatically inside, God was with us. So help me, he was. He was with us. And Debbie survived. Even if she hurt, we knew she liked the fact that we picked her up, held her close. And that was for a long time. She loved. She still is well loved.
I can tell.
I think that I was surprised at how strong her personality was and how tough she was. She in New York City, she was the streetwise kid. The older daughter who didn't have any of these issues is the one that was not. Debbie was streetwise and tough, and I was surprised that she used to skip. Not that she used to skip class, but that she used to skip class and go to the court and hang around family court because she was interested in the issues of special victims. This is when she was a teenager, and I just remembering how concerned we were and how problematic her early years were with her condition. It just is amazing to me. She turned into being the person she turned into.
Amazing. What would you both tell another parent who's maybe at the very beginning of this journey or this diagnosis? What do you hope that they know moving forward that could perhaps help them as they learn to advocate for their child and support their child?
Love and patience.
Mm.
Absolutely patience. And that child is more important than if you spilt something on the floor, somebody else is going to pick it up, but your child comes first.
Mm.
I think also being attuned and aware to the situation and keeping track of things. The fact that Debbie had reacted negatively to the sulfur drug in years earlier made us aware that she probably did not have appendicitis after she took the same drug and had this attack. I think being aware and Joyce was acutely attuned intuitively to all of Debbie's issues. And I think just being aware, that as important as the medical profession is, that you are the caretaker. You are the one that's next to the situation. And believing in your instincts and your intuition about the situation.
At nighttime was more the time I'd have to ask for help because the children change. And being a brand new, how old, just a couple of months, you had to just watch out night and day.
Mm.
That
24/7.
Because it was love. And it was love that made Skip and myself blend together. So we each had maybe a half an hour that was easier by stopping and letting one take over and let the other take over. And when we saw the first smile on this kid, I can't remember, but it was unbelievable.
Mm.
And look at she's smiling now.
It's a good one.
Yeah.
I think Joyce mentioned something that I think is very important. You hear often about how child's death or a child's disease ends up separating the couple, separating the parents.
Mm.
It becomes an issue. I think working on your own relationship with one another as parents and learning how to get through the rough spots together and learning how to love each other and learning that there is a dimension of the spirit. All of that, I think, is important because if the parents aren't able to work together and if the child becomes divisive, then obviously the situation really becomes untenable.
It's Joyce mentioned about taking care of Deb. She said love and patience. And it's not just love and patience for Deb, right? It's love and patience for herself, for you, Skip, for the medical team. It's those two constants, it sounded like, in your whole experience.
And having to think also about my older sister, who was 2 when I was, and that was a lot of stress on her. And I think a lot about that now as an adult, what she had to cope with. And thank God, my folks had extended family who were helping out, but that still meant that my sister was separated from her parents while my dad was working and my mom was seeing to my month-long hospitalizations or week-long hospitalizations.
Deb, since I have you, I would love to know what do you remember? What are some of your earliest memories of those hospital times?
Oh, wow. So I have no memory of the one where I was tied down at age 1.5. But my first hospitalization that I remember is I had a very high fever on Christmas Day when I was 3 years old. And my parents had to take me to the hospital because of the danger of the fever. That was one of the side effects of the ichthyosis, is that I don't perspire. and I have a real tough time with heat modulation. So a normal childhood fever would go much higher. And I do remember essentially having to learn to walk again. That might sound funny, but I guess I was bedridden for a week and my muscles atrophied. And I remembered that moment where my mother was sitting across the hospital room from me, encouraging me to walk towards her. That's one of my first memories. And then the next one I actually shared with my dad.
Deb, can I just interrupt?
Yeah.
The other thing she did with that hospital visit was to smuggle a frog into you.
Actually, Dad, that was the 6-year-old one.
Oh, okay.
Oh, hold on.
But I'm
Your
glad.
parents smuggled a frog in for you.
Yes.
Amazing.
So that was the beginnings of pet therapy. And when I was 6 years old, I had another, childhood illness where the fever went up and it went up to 105. And I have a very strong memory of my father carrying me across the kitchen towards the back door to the car and me crying loudly saying, I don't want to go to the hospital. Daddy, don't make me go. So he doesn't remember this, but I do. And at that time, my mom's brother was due to be married in Ohio. And my parents were supposed to go to that wedding. And I remember being in the hospital and my mom saying, do you want me to stay with you or do you want grandma to stay with you? And I said, Mommy. And she didn't go to her brother's wedding. And my dad and my sister went instead. And at the time, I had a pet frog named Jeff, who I named after my first true love, which was my father's assistant.
Oh,
He was 26 years old and I was madly in love with him. And I named my frog Jeff. And my mom brought the frog in a mayonnaise jar with the holes poked in it and let it out and let it hop around the bed to cheer me up. And I do remember that really clearly.
whoa.
So there are some good hospital memories like that. But for the most part, they're not good. And I do remember that hospitalization, the nurses trying to get my fever down by bathing me in, watered down alcohol, which was horrendous for my skin, and me crying for them to give me my cream, my lotion, and they wouldn't do it because they weren't listening to a kid, right? And I just remember the pain I felt and the adults not listening and how hard that was. So those are some of the memories from that 6-year-old hospitalization are very, very clear for me.
Skip, is that bringing up anything from you?
No, I do remember those hospitalizations and being concerned. But once again, in those situations, Joyce was the closest one
Joyce
to
was
it
there.
because I was I was busy doing my job. But I just remember being very sad that Debbie had to go to the hospital. I didn't like the fact that this happened so often. But with 105 fever, you just can't fool around with that.
Sometimes the right thing and the hard thing are the same thing, and that's not easy.
And believe it or not, I'm not a loudmouth usually, and Skip is only a little loudmouth, but we had to ask for help. They didn't know what was going on with Debbie. So we knew more than they did. And we had to yell till they heard what we said. And then they said, oh, let's do it this way.
Mm-hmm. Thinking about reflecting on Debbie growing up, what are some of the things that you learned about yourself, Skip and Joyce? What did you learn about yourself as her parents? Maybe that you didn't know before, or maybe something that flourished, or maybe something that surprised you about yourself.
Listening is the most important thing for little kids. You had to know what was making them cry.
I learned that patience is very important, and also for me personally, very difficult to develop. There was a lot of crying. Debbie hurt a lot, and I knew she was hurting, and I loved her, and I didn't want her to hurt. But sometimes patience was patience was something that was in short supply. Now I'm getting older and I'm doing better, but then that was a quality that really needed to be developed and needed to be developed consciously.
Mm. Yeah, sometimes we get so interested in finding out what's the source of the pain. Well, we figured it out. Well, why aren't you done crying about it yet? Right? And wanting to get to the end. And sometimes you just have to cry it out. It just has to come out one way. Are there any other stories or experiences that you want to share as it relates to Debbie, or anything else that you were hoping we would cover today, a story that I haven't asked you about yet?
Is love your child.
It's difficult because you got a whole life of living, many experiences, and many things. Nothing really stands out. It just at this point in my life, to look at Deb and see what a competent person she is and how well she's done in her field and the way she's respected is all just positive and makes me extremely proud of her. And I guess maybe the surprise is that a child who was born with such difficulties could turn into such a magnificent human being.
Mm. What hope you offer your family to so many. And what did it feel like when Deb asked you to do this podcast? When she asked you to go back to that place, which is not always easy to recall these events and these experiences.
No problem. I do anything for her, and she asked us to do it.
Mm. And it was easy to do because we worked it through with her to beginning, and to be able to tell somebody else that has a problem, you are willing to share some of your hurts too.
Mm.
And one thing I just would say, of course, contemporary, but I could never in my life imagine myself calling my parents more than once a month. With COVID, Debbie set up a situation where every day at 5:00 we go face to face, and it amazes me that she puts up with such old farts. But it is a real gift, and it's something I never would have imagined, because that certainly wouldn't have happened in my family of origin.
I've been on calls with Deb at 4:59, and I know at 5:00 it's family time.
I also am thinking about one of the questions, one of the preparation questions you asked about resources for folks. And when I was a baby, this didn't exist yet. But when I was 30 years old, I think actually my mom shared a newspaper article with me, and I stumbled across a foundation called the Foundation for Ichthyosis and Related Skin Types. The acronym is FIRST. And at the age of 30, I learned how to spell my disorder. I met the first person with the disorder, and I became deeply involved in the foundation. At one point, I was the president of the board of directors.
I was going to tell her that if you didn't.
Thanks, Pop. He's always good for a good shout out. But that organization is pivotal in helping new parents in this world, in this time. They have a website, they have conferences. You can immediately hook up with parents of a young child with the same disorder. So that isolation and not knowing and not understanding. The layman's definition that my parents were told and always shared with me was, you're missing a layer of skin.
Mm.
And actually, the opposite is true. What ichthyosis causes is for my skin your average skin takes 14 days for those cells to mature and slough off. Mine produce in 4 days and then don't slough off. So it's like a traffic jam of skin cells. And Dad, you said something very funny last night when we were speaking about how much skin I produced as a baby. Do you remember that?
No.
Yeah, right. I said you produce enough skin in a month to make a spinnaker for sailboat.
So
To make a spinnaker of a sailboat? Is that what you said?
A spinnaker, yeah.
Yeah. Oh my gosh.
A sail.
What would it have been like for you, Skip and Joyce, if when Deb was diagnosed or when she was going through this, they said, hey, we've got another family who's, maybe a year or two ahead of you? What would it have been like to been able to call them or talk with them?
I think it would have been tremendously helpful. I mean, we did feel rather isolated. I know what you think, honey, but it would have been helpful. We did, Joyce and I have gone to some of the national meetings of FIRST, which were tremendously helpful.
Wow. Even now, right? So if the resource wasn't
Definitely,
available then.
20 years ago or whatever.
Right.
Yeah.
Mm. It's good. It's processing.
and for kids to be able to know and speak with other kids who look like them and deal with the same struggles as them. They now, you know how many specialty medical summer camps they have. They have one for kids with ichthyosis. And so
Wow.
kids don't have to wait until they're 30 years old and feel so different and so outside of everybody else's spheres of understanding. You really, it's an amazing gift for children. So I think that's something parents need to know too, that their kids need to meet other kids like them.
I also, one thing that I want to touch on is right now there's such a push, as there should be, for this parent and child bonding at the beginning of life, and how important that is when it needs to be integrated into care. I think sometimes if you can't physically touch your child or hold your child for whatever reason, you feel like you're going to ruin them in some way, that you're missing this crucial opportunity. And while it's so good for providers to provide the opportunity for touch and holding, the bond I see between the three of you is palpable, is so strong. And so even if you're not afforded that opportunity, which is a privilege, it doesn't have to impact the way the rest of your life, your bond, how it can strengthen moving forward.
I don't see how anybody could have stopped us from touching Debbie. We went anytime while she was in the hospital, we went just to look and peek over the little bed. We were there for her. I took her to work with me as she got bigger.
I would too.
A lot of
Well,
photographs of mom toting me around.
Yeah.
during that first month, Debbie was touched by the nurses. So when we picked her up to take her to the children's hospital, she looked up and said, "And who are you?"
That was that car ride you were talking about, right up to Presbyterian. Mm.
No. Sense of humor is helpful. Not
We
always.
like that here. We really do. Well, I can't thank you enough for your time and your openness and your willingness to share and sharing your daughter with all of us. And thank you so much, Deb, for putting this together for me to interview your parents. I don't want to close up unless there's anything else anybody else wants to add or talk about or share.
I just want to thank you for your interest and congratulate you on the work you're doing.
Well, the honor is all mine. I'm so grateful to know Deb and to be able to offer parents a place to come and listen, to hear what it's like, because it's invaluable to have that kind of support and connection.
Listening has been how Debbie got to be the beautiful, full of spirit, because we listened if she cried, we listened and watched when she smiled. It was just the most wonderful watching the growth of this young lady.
Thanks, Mom.
I love you, Deb. Thank you.
Mutual. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you all so much for listening to Child Life on Call. If you head to our website, childlifeoncall.com, you're going to find all sorts of stuff there for parents, professionals, healthcare providers, child life specialists, no matter who you are. Actually, when you just go to our homepage, it'll help you direct to exactly where you need to go. On that, you'll find opportunities and PDUs for child life specialists, parents. We've got a starter kit for you, and clinicians. We even have a clinician course, which teaches you how to be a confident and capable caregiver in pediatrics. We're so grateful that you're here. Please DM us on Instagram. And like I mentioned, when you rate and review this podcast, it helps other families be able to find us. So let's keep doing that. And I will see you again here next week.